Dear Patch Podcast viewers and listeners, Friday morning, May 9th, Automoto Entertainment and Patch Podcast received a request from the guest that was currently featured in our 4th episode of our 2nd season to remove the episode from all platforms. We honored that request and had several conversations about how best to handle this situation for all involved. The result is this current edition of our interview, which has been edited to honor the wishes of our guest. Thank you for your patience and understanding.
Guys that have the stigma that they're coming to the club to run dope, sell guns, pimp these hoes, and bro, if you ain't come in with a bike note paid and ready to pay some dues, don't even come over here, bro.
Welcome to Patched, where we look at the personal impact of life in outlaw motorcycle clubs. This episode, my co-host Justin Mooch, DeLoretto, and I sit down with TakeNone, member of the Chosen Few Motorcycle Club.
It's family first. Not just the club family, but house family. Before the club, it's supposed to be family. And if you can't take care of home, there's no way that if you can't keep your household right, that you could even think to come to a chapter and that home and think that you're going to be able to keep this right.
That's this episode of Patched.
Are you an active member? The kind that would be missed? Or are you just content that your name is on the list? Do you attend the meetings and mingle with the flock? Or do you just stay at home and criticize and knock? Do you take an active part to help the club along? Or are you satisfied to just belong? To push the cause along and make things really thick? Or leave the work to just a few and talk about the clique? Think this over, brother. You know right from wrong. Are you an active member? Or do you just belong?
Hey, what's up? Good to see you, Jason.
Hey, good to see you too, brother. We've got a question from one of our viewers. Does anyone ever leave in good standing? Because it doesn't seem like it. That's a great question. You know, most of the people we talk to are guys that are, out bad for one reason or another. And it's not necessarily like a bad thing. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means that for whatever reason, that's kind of like the club tradition or the club rules, right? So if a guy leaves the club, depending on what the circumstances are, it's obviously easier to put somebody out bad than it is to leave somebody out in good standing. It kind of protects the club in a way, and I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with it. Every member's got their own circumstances as to why they're out bad or they're out good. And, of course, we could always talk about certain guys and why they should have their stuff reversed, but that's not our business to talk about. So, I don't know, Mooch, maybe you can chime in, but for me, it's just like, yeah, it's just a label, and so you can either let it defeat you or you can get up, prove everybody wrong about why you're labeled if it bothers you, so go ahead, Mooch.
Yeah, I think over the years it's changed quite a bit. Initially that status was reserved for people that had done something bad against the club, whether they were snitched, stole money, messed around with a member's old lady, those types of things. And so, they were put on no contact and, shouldn't be around that club or any affiliates of the club. I think these days it's kind of used in a lot of different ways, and I don't need to get super into it. But every club has different rules. For example, in the Mongols, if you leave the club for any reason whatsoever and you haven't been in for 10 years, you're automatically out bad, whether you're leaving for family reasons or whatever. And so I think now there's kind of levels to it, so to speak, for varying reasons. And sometimes it's political reasons, sometimes it's no contact, and maybe you just didn't have enough time in the club. So I think to kind of answer that question, I think it's changed a lot over the years. Some people still do leave in good standing. Some people are still retired in good standings. But it really just depends on the club and what that club's rules are.
Yeah, well answered, Mooch.
Yeah, another question we got is someone asking us what the significance of the shape of the diamond is for the 1%er diamond. And honestly, I'm not sure. It's one of those things. I know the history of the 1%er, but I'm not sure why it was chosen to be a diamond and not anything else. You have any insight on that, Jason?
Basically, from what I can gather, or we were kind of chatting about this before, was that to wrap the one, it's probably the best looking design, right? Because the one is at a high point and a low bottom, right? So it's kind of fitting into a triangular formation. So my only thought is that at the time they said this is the best way to represent, to be something unique on your cut, to have it be in a diamond, right? And that's where the whole thing started. So I don't think it's anything more than that.
I think it's a recognizable shape in the club world now, and probably because of that, that's why it's more recognizable. But now it's used in a lot of clothing lines and different merchandise, and I see it pretty frequently. So I don't think it's specific to that world or that culture anymore. But yeah, I think you're right. It was probably just aesthetically pleasing.
And again, all this stuff came out of California, right? And see how far it's gone and almost double back to us, right? Like Mooch was saying, it's in T-shirts, it's on pictures, it's everywhere, right? So I mean, something that somebody came up with in the 1920s, 1930s to talk about our culture. I mean, look at where it's come, right? So it's just deciding a shape around a one on a patch has basically lived on forever in history. So it's pretty cool. All right, here's a comment we got from one of our viewers. This is my favorite episode. So far, I really respect Little Dave being vulnerable. When I left the club I was affiliated with, I felt like I was lost in between two worlds. I had a shotgun in my mouth several times. I got into recovery, and now I am a drug and alcohol counselor. It helps me helping people who are lost. I still see a therapist about the guilt I have for missing so much of my kid's life. I'm coming up on 5 years of recovery and can honestly say I'm a better dad than I've ever been. I mean, just, that hits home, right? Not hits home for me. It just hits home for the fact that what we're doing, it just validates. It's people that are listening to this. People are getting something out of it. People are communicating. It has having a positive effect. Mooch, you want to add to that?
Yeah, doing this show really helped me realize how many people out there really struggle with that transition from leaving club life or military life, and then having a purpose or figuring out what to do moving forward. A lot of us gave a lot of our lives to this, and potentially neglected family and friendships, and that's a pretty heavy thing to like sit down and reconcile with moving forward. So I'm really happy that we can help these guys, and that we can go out there and speak on something and let them know they're not alone, and hopefully guys are getting more help from it. So it's a really cool comment. I'm really excited about it.
On this episode, we interviewed TakeNone, a current member of the Chosen Few Motorcycle Club.
Yeah, TakeNone's father was actually the president of the Scorpions out of Detroit, a really well-known club that's been around for a long time. I think you guys are really going to like this episode, so check it out.
Today with us, we have TakeNone from the Chosen Few. TakeNone, first question we have to ask for you is, growing up in Texas, your passion for motorcycles and being around the environment, what led you to getting into motorcycles and eventually deciding to become a member of a club?
So growing up with the stigma of my dad was president of the Dallas chapter Scorpions, who were based out of Detroit. He was the president there from 86 all the way into 92. I didn't grow up with him. It was the stigma of him. It's kind of like that thing. My mom was basically a PO at the time, ultimately ended up getting pregnant, and he was anti-child. I don't do kid. And so we were all kind of pushed to the side at that point. It started there. I grew up where's dad? Where's dad? You go see, there's dad. And never more than an hour at a time, never spent the night with him, anything like that. I think I got my first air bike when I was 6, and I probably been on two wheels longer than I've been driving a car. So.
And so would you say that like you still idolized your dad even though he wasn't around? You saw like he had that mystical presence, right? Like you looked at him and you were like, there's something about this guy. The image.
Yeah, well, you want to do what your dad does. Most of them, right? If you got your dad around or whatever. He wasn't around. There really wasn't a replacement person either. Grandfathers, uncles, things like that. But early on, there was nothing else. So what do you know? He's the biker. He was the one. And then when you would go see him, he was the president. And so it's the come over here and sit down and meet and you listen, but you're not talking. You're just you're listening. And then at that time, you're 4, 5, 6 years old. You're only seeing so much. And then it's just like I said, it's the mystique of why not? Why not do it?
I mean, to be a young guy and to look and see your dad's wearing a patch. I mean, the other kids' dads were not wearing patches, so that separated it, right? Made it cool, for sure. That's a cool factor. Huge.
It's that cool factor, but it's also that, dad wasn't there. He wasn't there at all. So when the concept or the conversation or anything ever come up of that, this is what you get, and you just get the brief. Yeah. So it always meant just a little bit more because, hey, I'm finna go play with my dad, or I'm finna go do play ball with my dad, or whatever. That wasn't there with me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go see him over here one day for a little bit and then come back. So, that mystique of what it is and how he perceived his life at that time, to me, it always stuck with me. And then of course, once I got two wheels, it never left.
When you got a bike and when you got into clubs, did you gain like a better relationship with your dad later on in life, or did it always stay that kind of that separation, or how'd you deal with that, like, mentally, for guys that are in the same boat that are watching this?
Yeah, so somewhere around the teenage years, transition, and stopped being around him, doing anything. He actually passed in '03. I would have been like 17, 18 there. So I hadn't seen him there in a year. And of course, my mother's expectation of life was I as a teenager love motorcycles, but of course I wanted a sport bike. I was all over sport bikes, want to go fast, want to go fast. And she swore up and down that I'll never let you have a sport bike. I'll steal it, I'll blow it up, I'll do whatever. Um, Lo and behold, she ended up going to prison. And within a week of her going to prison, I brought my first Kawasaki 636. Couldn't tell me nothing. It was everything in the world. Um, but at that time, my mother's concept of me and my dad is I was raised to love everybody. Black, white, purple, yellow, green, whatever, you love everybody. My mother always made it a point when we would be around to see you realize that there's nobody else here. It's just them. Me, I want to be like dad. Her, you need to be everything that your dad's not. The bigger lesson in life. It was always, I don't want you to be like your dad. I don't want you to be like your dad.
Mm.
And your dad didn't want you around. I don't know if those comments ever always just kept the urgency to keep, but I want to be. There's a reason. What was
Yeah.
the reason?
So you felt like that was a driving force to push you, kind of like, I'm going to prove I can do this and be at that level.
So seeing at it there, and there was never even growing up. And once I did actually get my first street bike, the mentality wasn't to go straight to the club stuff. I was happy to have a street motorcycle at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The club thing and all that, I'm not ashamed to admit, I was right there in that biker boy boomer that came out. Everybody was, it's biker boys and get in the club and go this. Nobody really knew what was going on. Although I grew up around seeing my dad and the life and what they did, and it was nothing. It was nothing that was in the movies, but it was the same thing. Up here in Dallas, in my area, if you was on a sport bike, you pretty much was on the black bike set. If you had a Harley, you was pretty much over there. But 20 years ago, if you had a sport bike, you was on the black bike set, and you pretty much had the black bike set. And I transitioned into that. I think about a year or so, year and a half after that. That's when I started to pursue my first club. It just so happened somebody in my neighborhood was coming up on another sport bike, caught him, and that's where it went to, and it's led down the road.
With dad not being in the picture, did that influence how you thought of like motorcycle clubs or Harley riders or those types of things? Like, did you have a negative taste in your mouth because of it, or did that not play a role?
It didn't play a role. The Harley thing, I always said I would never get an old man bike. That was my mother. No, you're gonna go get a Harley. You're gonna go slow. You're not gonna get a sport bike. Nah, it's an old man bike. I'm not gonna go get a Harley. I came from dirt bikes and then just immediately went to my first sport bike, and I never looked back. And I think I went through three, four sport bikes over a course of probably 7, 8 years, and then just one day was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna just go look at a Harley. Went to the dealership and got talked into the worst deal ever, but I came home with a Harley.
But so dad being involved in this old school, I mean, the Scorpions were a well-known old school club for a long time, and I know you were very young when it was happening, but that didn't necessarily
Right.
like turn you off from club life, or did it attract you to club life? Like, did it play? How did it play a role in you getting into Harleys?
So later on, and of course, going through, like I said, I came into that biker boy set with that mentality of the old traditional way. When I would get to see my dad, it was either at the clubhouse off Ferguson in the back of the big yard, or it was at a park somewhere that they had ridden to. It was never individual a long time. So all I saw of him was club. So then it went back to that mystique. When I got to the point to where I was ready to transition away from my sport bike and over to Harleys, and then later on into, from the 99 over to the Outlaw side. Looking back, there were a lot of things that I had expected coming in to this life from what I have seen, but that then comes from that coming over here. My club is very different from most traditional clubs because we kind of pioneered that traditional mindset on our own terms on this side. So yeah,
Outside perspective, growing up and then having quote unquote kind of an absentee father, but seeing that when you were around him, it was all club related, right? Or that, like you said, that's what it's. So I think
right.
traditionally, most kids would go one of two ways, where either you would hold it against the club, right? Like I didn't see my dad because of club life, or like you said, there's this mystique of like, okay, I grew up around this and I know some stuff about it. And so I was just more curious on kind of which lane you went. And it sounds like it was more of the mystique piece. But did you hold any sort of grudges because of it?
Um, there probably as a kid, it's hard for me to go all the way back to a kid. I would have probably said, yeah, I probably did hold grudges. Later on, I'll be honest, I'll say those grudges actually leaned towards my mother because finding out later on, it was really her who was really doing the keeping away through that teenage life that I told you. I told you as I got into that teenage, those far and few betweens that I did get to see him, they kind of dissipated and went away. And that was really on my mother's account. So that grudge that I had, it really wasn't towards him. It was really more towards her, even though he was always, you're not here because, I don't have time to deal with kids. As you can see,
Yeah.
I remember seeing and hearing those words at times.
So it takes two, right? And looking back at it, you're saying that your mom was trying to keep you from fantasizing or falling in love with that lifestyle, right? Because like,
Absolutely.
hey, trying to protect you, and it's hard to see it in the moment, but as we get older, like we talk about in a lot of these episodes, you can look back and say, well, she did that to help me, and
Correct. Correct.
if you can acknowledge it now, it's half the battle.
It,
So.
it definitely was, I picked the lesson later on. Did come where it was, and I did. I was able to make that distinction between.
So maybe you can give us a little bit of a history lesson about your club. I know it started in 1959 in the Los Angeles area, but like growing up in Texas, when did the Chosen Few come into Texas? Was it after you'd gotten a bike and been in the clubs they came in, or had they been there for a while? Give some of our listeners kind of that knowledge of how Chosen Few kind of spread out across North America,
Yeah.
and into Texas.
I like to refer to.
Being a traditional club, right? Like you guys started back in the early era when motorcycle clubs were first starting, but being a club that, like you said, was mixed race back then, when most of the, quote unquote traditional clubs weren't allowing other races to join, or the predominantly white. How does that make your club different than the other, so-called outlaw clubs or traditional clubs, the clubs that have been around for that long? How is your club different from them?
One of the things, that's kind of a broad answer to say.
What kind of things differentiate you guys from the other one percenter clubs? So are you Harley only? I mean, I know there's the race aspect, but outside of the race thing, is it still a Harley only? Is it still very similar to just one percenter culture of those other clubs?
So we've
Can you elaborate more on that as far as like having one percenters in versus being one percenter club, just for the the listeners that don't know the difference?
so I mean it comes down to
As far as I'm concerned,
Yeah, very respected old school club for sure.
you guys have got our respect 100%, bro. 100%, man.
right.
In those early years, I mean, I don't want to get bunch in your history, but I like this stuff because I don't think we don't get a lot of guys from the mixed race set on our show. So it's like, and I like getting that history.
Got you.
So in those early years, obviously you guys were an outlaw club. Like I said, you built a big reputation, good respect. How did you guys get along with those traditional, so to speak, outlaw clubs in the early years, and then how do you guys get along with them now?
Well, I mean, we'll talk about, A1 out there in Southern California. That would have been, the one prominent club out there when we started, when we would have been around in the 60s and 50s, right? There's pictures of my founder, Sonny Barger, all of them meetings in California and LA, you know, correlating and moving together. Um, as time has come and that line has been formally drawn, that was not just a part of the world, but then a part of our culture too. 1% Outlaw Club, Black Outlaw Club, whatever. Territorial base, but out there where we were back then, we didn't have issues with the white. I mean, like I said, there's pictures of us, Toby Jean from East Bay Dragons,
Oh, yeah. East Bay Dragons.
with Sonny and a lot of those guys that sat down together in town halls with the city of Los Angeles on the same thing. I can't speak for every area because every area is, so I'll speak for my personal. One of the first rides that I did after I got patched in, solo rides out to Mother, I stopped at my San Bernardino chapter, and one of the bros was like, "What You ever been to A1's clubhouse over here, their mother chapter? And I was, no. Let's go over there. I'll each president. So I went over there and I met Rick, met his son. They opened up. You wrote from Texas. Back my plates up. You can have anything in the bar. This was like 8 o'clock at night. I don't think I left till like 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, built off the man, not the patch, right? Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
I know Rick was in the club with them. Great brother. Great
Yeah.
guy. I can see that for sure. And I actually went to your guys' clubhouse in San Bernardino and got the same treatment when I was there. I mean, like,
Yeah.
without a doubt. You know, and I got to know a lot of the guys from the Chosen Few with being in the NCOC and the COC, and I knew
Right.
Bishop and some of those guys back in the day. And I knew you guys had all your own internal issues just like any other club, right? Like all the own internal struggles.
I think that just comes with the club. Yeah.
Yeah, it just comes with the territory. Comes with the club, it comes with the territory. The size of your club, the more problems, right?
Absolutely.
And I knew you guys had all the same stuff. I could see the similarities. And I just said to myself, there's a network here. And I say this all the time. There is a network here that we're missing out on. Because, like you just said, you could ride to Purdue and stay somewhere for the night. Just how we could be riding to Texas and either stay with you guys or the Banditos or the Mongols
Right.
or somebody on the way.
Absolutely.
You know, and get the hospitality you need. You know,
Yep.
it's like that's what the culture is supposed to be about.
Absolutely.
So let's take a step back. So you went from the 636 and decided to get a Harley. At what point did you get drawn into the club life, and what was the first club you joined?
Yeah, so my first club was actually in a 99. I was a sport bike club. And I had the 636. And when I started prospecting for that 99 club, yeah, that would have been all at 07, 08, I guess, at that point. And I couldn't keep up with anybody else. So I went and traded it in for a Gixxer 1000 so I could keep up. Um, and it was probably, I don't know, give or take 2, 3 years from then, just one day. And I was still part of the same 99. So I will say probably that 2010 era, that's when that biker boy thing started fizzling out. And all the black set that was all on sport bikes all started going to Harleys and stuff. That was just kind of that transition that was kind of, I caught it a little early on my end. I just happened to, like I said, I was really going to a dealership to just go look.
That's what we all do, brother. That's what we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I was really just going to go look and walked in, and there was just this, man, I make you a deal you can't miss. And of course, I didn't know about Harleys at the time. I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't know about motor size. I didn't know anything. I think this was 2010, 2011, and I walked away with an '05 Road King. And
Yeah.
I thought I was, I didn't know nothing about a 96. I didn't know about the fatter tire. All I know was I had a Road King, and they were giving me a fairing. They had the radio on it, and I was ready to go.
Yeah.
Worst investment, worst bike I've ever bought in my life. And then turned around and did what everybody does, dump a insane amount of money into it, kept it for a year, and then went and traded it in for a brand new Harley.
What did you do to it? So like when you bought a new, especially, I mean, it was your first one, but in general, when you buy a new Harley, what are some of the first things you do to it?
And especially being a Road King, what'd you do
Yeah.
to that thing?
So when I bought it, it already had some bars on it, and the guy was like, well, the guy who's selling it has a fairing on it, and I think you can put a radio in it. And I was like instantly sold, like, man, I'll have everything I need, radio ready to go. Um, Again, that was my first Harley. I did a lot of stupid stuff because again, I bought it. I had a bunch of sport bikes. I ended up selling like one of my nicer sport bikes, and I put paint job and I did the little stretch bags, and I made that fairing that they had given me. They basically molded it in, and I had put a radio in it. I dumped easily 6 grand into a bike that was, almost 10 years old and had a 80,000 miles or something on it. Got it back from whenever I did this paint job, took it on a trip, hit a bump, cracked the rear fender that was all fiberglass together and stuff, and went and traded it in. I was so mad.
And
So
what'd you get next?
the next one that I bought, I traded in on it was a 2015. It's right when they bought the Road Glides back after that Rushmore, when they had told everybody they weren't going to make them anymore. So I went and got
Yeah.
one right off the lot. I'm a stickler now, and I'm probably, 5, 6, 7 Harleys in. First thing is bars, because I can't do stock bars. I've got a small torso, my arms. I left the leaning over the tanks for the sport bikes, so when I let them go, so first thing is bars for me. Shortly after that is usually an exhaust and then a seat, and depending on what I'm using the bike for, it depends on where I start spending the money.
What kind of bars do you go for now? Because the T-bar things are really huge now, really popular, but I know a lot of people still run apes and stuff. So what's your go-to?
Actually, on both the months, so on my King, I've got They actually started out there. There's a company called Triple OG bars, but they're the pullback with the points on them. So they're
Yeah, I've
kind of
seen
like
those.
pullback meat hooks. So
Yeah.
I've got like 20-inch pullbacks on the King. On the Street Glide, I've got 23-inch pullbacks, but they're the hammer bars.
Those are some tall ass bars, bro.
Yeah, but what it is, well, they're tall, but they pull back into you. So I go back to the next thing is now it's bars and a seat. Get you a good backrest and a seat, bro. You can go for days.
Oh, backrest
Go
is a
for
game changer,
days.
huh? The rider
Oh yeah.
backrest. I have a fused cervical spine, and I remember I borrowed a bike one time. It was a Heritage, and it had a rider backrest, and I was like, "This old man thing, I don't want that." And then I wrote on it, and I was like, "Ever since then, my bike needs a rider backrest, man."
Yeah, it's really hard to, and like you, I've been in several accidents, got two or three discs that are fused together or whatever, and so I have a certain way where I like to lean on one leg, and I'm just in. It's like if I don't have a backrest, I just feel like I'm sliding and sliding in.
Yeah.
I have a backrest and stock bars, then you're just kind of doing that Superman thing down the highway again. It gets rough.
Were you still in the sport bike club when you bought the Harley, or did you?
I was, yeah. I remained in the sport bike club probably another 6, 7 months,
And then what
and then
drew you
I
to the next club?
So when I left, me and several other people left that same club. At that point, it was probably five or six. We all had Harleys, and we knew what we wanted was a all male, all Harley club in the city. On the Black Club. We attempted to do several different things. I think we ended up over 2 years. We sat down with no rags for almost 2 years before we ended up doing anything. We ended up starting the Kings of the South Dallas chapter.
Did you guys start your own club?
Not wasn't another club. It was actually a club that was formed out of Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, so you guys joined a different club, but it wasn't fresh. You didn't make it yourselves.
Correct. Different club.
Yeah.
We stood the chapter up there in Dallas.
Yeah, I've actually recently seen that patch. I moved to Georgia this last year,
There in
and I know
Dallas.
Atlanta's got a lot of different black clubs, and I remember seeing that patch recently. So you mentioning it, I probably just saw it on Instagram recently. So
Atlanta is their mother chapter. They started 17, 18 years ago. And they're in, 10, 12 states, probably 15, 16 chapters across all those states out there. We started the Dallas chapter out here. And I was with them for just shy of about a year and just ready to make that jump.
Did you meet somebody from the chosen few that you clicked with, and that's why you decided to jump over, or did you just go cold and introduce yourself?
So funny story about that. In that 2 year downtime, after I left my first 99 club, I actually sat down with one of the DJs, the OGs who's still here, OG DJ, call him the Moonshine Man, if you've ever seen him. So that's right around that time where it'll tell you start seeing one or two people that was in the area. They were trying to build a charter. He lived in Louisiana, was trying to start a North Texas charter, had a guy in Austin, a guy in Dallas that was prospecting. And we actually sat down. I had me and like four or five guys sit down with him at a party to the side one night and let him go through the spiel of what the chosen few was. And that was kind of right there at their key point. It's actually, they weren't even wearing bottom rockers at the time. We had sat down and talked to him. And, you know, I guess you said it was probably any old club, but when you get in front of an OG who's just, hell bent on those absolute stuck in the mud
Mm-hmm.
old ways and don't want to change, he didn't know how to sell it. I guess I can say if that's, and I guess in this point he wasn't trying to sell it. But when we talked to him, the way he was talking just wasn't the way we moved. So all of us just kind of dispersed. Back to the question that you asked, I actually have brothers that were in Chosen Few before me that I have probably a 20-year relationship with, that between us have been in probably three, four different clubs. And this is the first club we've been in together. He was here before me. So,
was there an issue that you stepped away from, or was it more of that, like a lot of us have gone through, where you're wanting to step up to something bigger? Like, what kind of motivated that move?
yeah. So when we started the Kings, I was actually already in the process of fixing to start another support club for another outlaw club. We had been trying to do this back and forth with the Kings of South, like I said, for like 2 years. And I had just got frustrated. Um, I ended up, y'all do what you're gonna do. I'm gonna go figure out what I'm gonna do. Uh, they ended up coming back to me literally a month before I was, making moves to do something else. Hey, we're here, we're ready. And I said, cool. I said, just know that, I do have ambitions to do something else. I'll go help you because my brothers, these were guys that I had been, 5, 6 in the years with the previous club with. I will stop what I'm doing. I will come help and stand the chapter up. And we did. We stood it up. They did great. And just shy of a year, I went on to pursue what I was doing. It wasn't a hard feeling thing. It was just the people we had brought in, the way that they moved. I moved differently, in my opinion. And so I felt it was the right time for me to move, and I just went right on with my transition.
And it sounds like that was a goal, right? Like you were pretty upfront about it. Like, I'm here to help you guys get started, but I'm moving on to something
Absolutely.
else. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Mooch. A lot of you have been asking where to get an autographed copy of my book, and the only place you're going to be able to get it is here at the automotoentertainment.com website. The link's down below. We'll have paperback and hardback, so click the link, check it out, and get your signed copy today.
That's great, Mooch. A lot of people have been asking me about that. It's a great read, and you guys got to check it out. Patch merchandise is available at automotoentertainment.com. So now we've got a really good basis on, like, you know, your history and your different clubs and what brought you to motorcycles and things like that. But like, what we're really trying to talk about here on this podcast is, you know, men that are dealing with struggles and, you know, all the problems that we see and we deal with in the clubs. So can you give maybe some insight to like how you deal with all the stressors that are in our lives, like on a personal level? Like, you know, do you have a routine that you go through during the day? Do you have somebody that you talk to? Do you have, you know, a group of guys that you reach out and that you guys can all kind of talk about this, you know, that kind of stuff, so people at home can assimilate with what's going on?
Essentially, how do you balance like the club life,
Yeah.
family life, work life? Like, how do you go about balancing all that?
That's one of the things that I'll say that I kind of pride myself on when it comes to work-life balance. I've been doing the same stuff for probably about 15, 20 years. I work in the IT field. I've worked for the same guy for probably about half of that or more. And he's pretty much been through every club that I've ever been through with me. He doesn't ride, doesn't know anything about the life, but he knows that if I pick up the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning and tell him that I'm not coming to work, he understands. That's something that everybody doesn't have, and that's a big stressor for a lot of people, especially when
Absolutely.
you've never been in an outlaw club and what you've done is hang around and you see the big things. You don't know. You don't know coming in what the real demand is. You just assume, until you get to it, you just assume. And I'll be honest, that was probably one of the factors that kept me so long. That 2 years that I sat in limbo, I probably could have made that transition, but I had a lot going on with kids. I had young kids. As a matter of fact, when it comes to, work life, relationship balance, and club, it was the motorcycle as a 99 that actually caused the separation between me and the mother of my kids. I would be gone. I remember my son, my firstborn, was 8 days out of the hospital. I'm in a 99 club telling her I got to go make a run. But I left with everything. I left you with somebody to take care of, kids healthy, you're healthy, you got everything you need. But I got to go make a run, and that was just my mentality, because anything I take serious. So even then, it was serious for me, to the point to at that point, it can be stressful depending on the person, and I think it comes down to the individual, and it's hard for so many people because some people have the availability, some people have the money, some people have um the mental capacity to take on different things. Trying to manage a household where you got bills, I think everybody's got those. You got kids, a lot of people have kids. Some of us got old ladies, wives. Then stack a job on top of that and everything that comes with the responsibility of a job. And then you put the club on it. And there's so many different levels on the club side too, because even as just a member, that's a taxing thing. But if you're an officer of a chapter, if you're an officer, regional board or your national board, those things just all amplify and it's more and more. It's like a job that you never really asked for.
I think a good point you make too is the personal piece of it, because you can join a 99% club, right, and do the bare minimum. You could spend more time with your family than you do with the club. And in some 1%er clubs, I've known these members too, that they can show up and do the bare minimum. But a lot of us, the type of people we are, you join that, whether it's a 99% club or 1% club, and you're all in and you're going to go above and beyond because you believe in what you're doing and just who you are as a person. And I think
Absolutely.
that's when that struggle slash balance plays a role, right? Is, hey, okay, now
Correct.
I take this so serious that I hold this to a very high priority, and that's when you have to start prioritizing things and figuring things out. So I think that's a good way to look at it for sure.
So the question is, take none is, how do you reset yourself when things get to be a lot? You know what I mean? Or what's your routine like?
Ah,
Or do
you
you
know
do you
the
have triggers? Do you have triggers that happen and you realize I've got to reset myself. I got to get back on track.
I can usually tell when club life is starting to hit me, and unfortunately, with my role, it hits me on a mental capacity because I'm constantly on the phone or dealing with things. I will shut everything else outside of my four walls down. I will make sure that my responsibilities within the nation are covered for the moment, and turn the phone off and go. I'll 24 hours go black for everything. Make sure the right people know, and then just go. It's not an often thing for me. Maybe once every 3 months, but it's the time to sleep. It's the time to catch up on the things that you have missed. Thankfully, I'm in a relationship where I get to see a lot of my old lady during the day. It's also a lot where I work from home, so I do a lot of my club stuff from home during the day. So I get to deal with that here on the spot, whether I know a lot of people in the nation, or presidents and stuff, they got to get out. They have to leave to go handle situations and do things. Again, it comes on the individual. For me, because I have a job where I'm basically a disaster readiness team, so if it's on the spot, my day to day for work, I probably do 2 to 3 hours, work day to day. I probably work harder for the club every day individual than I do for my job just because, it's there. It's always there. And it doesn't wait for 5 o'clock to cut off. It's more like 5 o'clock in the morning and then they hit you with
Yes.
everything. So, that mentality of, sleeping with two phones next to the bed and waiting for the 4 o'clock phone call or not going to bed because you've been on a call for 3 or 4 hours and you're looking at your old lady and she's looking at you like, you know, those things that you have to be able to make time for and account for. And I think a lot of here's where we'll go back to the question that Mooch asked about that difference between the traditionalism. My club's basis, our we were founded on it's family first, not just the club family, but house family. Before the club, it's supposed to be family. And if you can't take care of home, there's no way that if you can't keep your household right that you could even think to come to a chapter and that home and think that you're going to be able to keep this right. It's not fathomably possible. Now, do people attempt it and do it every day? Absolutely.
That's who they are.
Absolutely. We've talked about it before, Jason, on other or other episodes. And the longer you're in this lifestyle, you understand that if you don't have your family in order, you're likely not going to be the best member you can be. And what I mean by that is, if you're out with the club, but you're on the phone because you're fighting with your old lady, or she's telling you to come home, or she doesn't support you being out, your mind's somewhere else, or your head's somewhere else, or your kid's birthday party, but you're over here doing this. You're thinking about it, and it's hard to be a dedicated member or a good member if you don't have the two things in order. And I think that's when that figuring out that balance is the most important.
Yes, and when you're trying to make an example to your charter to do the right thing, right? So you're trying to go on the runs. You're trying to balance work and home life.
Take none. So, we've talked before a little bit off air, and you were speaking of a story about how you manage your work life balance. So, you mind sharing that with our viewers?
Yeah, part of the thing is, I will say that a lot of these guys, when they come in, they try to shield themselves from what they really have to do, right? I set it very early on expectation when I even started, even when I was hanging around.
I think that goes to setting boundaries, but also leading by example, right? Setting those examples, and just like we said about the family stuff, works the same. What kind of member can you be if you can't pay dues, you can't afford to be on the road with your brothers, you can't afford the hotels? Like, I mean, having a job is an essential part this day and age of being an active member.
People still kind of fantasize, and it's on the younger members to really look back and see. Unfortunately, my club, most of my OGs were out on the West Coast, so I will say that for my nation, if you don't take your ass out to the West Coast, it's hard pressed to get in front of a lot of the ones that are still around. There's
Mm-hmm.
some spread throughout, but you got these guys that have the stigma that they're coming to the club to run dope, sell guns, pimp these hoes, and bro, if you ain't come in with a bike note paid and ready to pay some dues, don't even come over here. Man, I might have to work tomorrow. That's cool. Well, are you gonna work tomorrow? It'd be the same brother. I might have to work tomorrow, not show up for the run, and then know his ass didn't go to work.
And I think those morals and values, that's something people miss, is those things are the same despite the ecology, right? Like, listen, if you're calling in sick to work, you're likely going to call in sick on a run. If you don't prioritize work, you probably don't prioritize the club. And I think that's something that's missed. And like you said, especially with the younger guys, because it's tunnel vision, they're gung ho.
Right.
But a lot of the older guys who can look back and I'm going to judge that character because those two things play off of each other.
Absolutely.
Well, because we've seen it, right? We see the character. You see the people that start to line up, and you see the guys that come and go, and you say, this is why that person went, and then that's why this person goes, and it all blends into these categories. And you're trying to stop these guys, like you said, like, hey, you just told me you don't necessarily have to go to work tomorrow. Well, are you going to go to work this week, or how is everything at home? Like,
right.
Those are all tells. You know what I mean? And we've all seen it, right? We've seen the guys that, like, they don't go to work for a few days because they're trying to keep up with some cool guys and they think it's fun, and the next thing you know, they're out of a job, and then they can't pay dues, and then the charter's mad at them, and it's a down cycle until they're out of the club, and then they wonder, well, what happened? Well, you didn't take care of your first priorities, which is to balance the life between work, family, and club. They just don't get it.
You missed something there. Before they get to the what happened, it was, well,
That victim mentality, man. And unpopular opinion, but I've talked to Jason about it before. But as I got older, it was one of those things, like we said, you're always looking at prospects and newer members and seeing what kind of person are they and how can I depend on them versus based off their actions, not their words. And I always use the example. It's like that guy that we know loves and respects his wife and it's his best friend, and then we see him openly cheating on her, which, whatever. But in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if they're going to do that, this guy says I'm his best friend. How am I supposed to trust him if he's lying to this person he says is the most important to him in his life? And I think, those, I'm sure we can argue that to different extents, but same thing as far as going to work, showing up on time, being a man of your word, calling, staying in touch with phone calls. All those things play a role, whether it's in your work life or your family life, still affects how you are as a member.
absolutely.
Yeah, like I said before, I said if you can walk to a brother's car and his truck or vehicle is a disaster inside, that's a pretty good tell that their life is probably in shambles, right?
Hey, they say smart people are messy, man. I read it on the internet.
That all plays into, like we said, like the last guest said, hey, I get up every morning, I make my bed. It's like if you get up every morning, you dial in your before you get out and step into the world, then you're going to be that successful guy that takes care of his job, takes care of his brothers in the club, that you can count on.
All right.
You prioritize tasks and you get them done. Same with club.
Yep.
For guys that have these mental struggles, they're putting themselves into worse and worse problems every day because they just can't take care of the basics. And it's like when we give advice to people that are looking for help, it's like start with the basics. Start by waking up in the morning, eating healthy, making your bed, making sure your place is clean. Look around and say, I've accomplished something. And then what's next?
And it's no different with the club, right? Like make sure your oil's changed, your tires pass pressure, you're showing up to meetings with a tank full of gas. Like
It's all a checklist.
It's all a checklist. It's all a checklist.
It's all a checklist.
How many guys we know that the same big run comes up every year and they're not ready for it? And you're like, I'm sorry, it was 11 months and 2 weeks since we last left, and you're telling me your tires aren't ready to go, or your oil's not changed, or you don't have a bike that can make it, or you don't have the money. It's like you knew all year long that this is what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
TakeNone, I got a question too. It's a little off topic, but so coming up, getting into motorcycles and all that, as a white person or, a white motorcycle rider, what made you have that decision to join mixed race clubs? Like since the door was more open to you, so to speak, and you decided to go, with a mixed race club, was that your morals and values? Was it because of the people you knew, who you were around? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, actually, it was definitely the morals and values, and that was part of that lesson that my mother very much so instilled when don't be like him. Like I said, those things were very much pointed out to me at an early age that when you was around, it was pretty much only white people, maybe some Latinos, but it's pretty much only white people. Um, Coming up, I was taught to love everybody, love everything, every color, mixed, Chris, race. I grew up my childhood where I was the whites were the minority. The Latinos were the majority there. So I had a childhood where I didn't know how to be the minority or to be it just wasn't there for me. When it come time to do the club thing, again, because I started on sport bike and I was right there on that biker boy boom, I just instantly fell into the black bike set because if you're a mixed club, you're basically on the black bike set. I
Right.
don't know who made that rule whenever that rule was made, but that's just apparently how it is. So I was there and I just, coming that way. When it came time to make the decision, I had a lot of, you know, no, there's a lot of things that along the way that prescribed. I had people that were part of Outcast that mentored me along the way and things that I knew I could never be over there. At the same time, I had people inside of the Scorpions where my dad was. I'm a legacy member that I could have gone that way. I could have never today as a child. Yeah, seeing the dad now, I want to go be over there. Today, as a grown man, with that lesson in my head, the way that I am today, I could never be over there. Could never be, in a Bandito club. But that's me. I have people, in Banditos that I've known for a long time that I've got close personal relationship with. Same thing with people in Outcast, in Lovers and 8-1. I've known them forever that had those relationships with. It's just not for me. When it came time to go that route, everything was progressive. I never made it to that point to where I said, "Oh, I'm just gonna go be in a white club," or give up. When I was talking to people when I was leaving Kings of the South, and I pretty much knew where I was going at that point, but in that time frame, I had sat down with the Vagos who were just standing up in Texas at the time with Jester. I had sat down with people from the Outlaws out of Oklahoma who have, that had at the time had people flying around. I was close enough and had relationships enough through other people where I could get to the right people. If that was, I could have gone anywhere. At that time, Chosen Few I had knew some people. The brother that I've known 20 plus years was there. It just felt like at that point in time when I was ready to make that move, that was the only real logical place for me to go, given my area and location, and the person that I am.
Do you feel like you got treated any different as being a white member in a mixed club?
Yes, absolutely. What's crazy is I can go back to my first club, 99. Um, when I was prospecting, my first run that our my mother chapter was in Houston. I lived in Dallas, same dynamic. My first run to Houston as a prospect, the sergeant at arms of the mother chapter actually pulled me to a side and he said, "You know what you're doing?" And I'm first club green, grew up around. I said, "Oh, what? I'm prospecting." He says, "No, but do you realize that you're gonna take treatment? Your people are going to look at you funny." And yeah, I don't care. I got black kids. People look at me funny anyways. Yeah, but this is different over here. And he was not wrong. He said, you at some point in your lifetime, you're going to have someone come up and be derogatory about the fact that you were in a black club." And used a lot of derogatory language. And it didn't happen right at first, but that time did come. I did have a bandito come up and ask me, "What the are you doing over there? You don't belong there." That club that I was a part of, Street Effects, we were part of the COC. And what's crazy to me is I've got this COC patch on with 7 other members of my chapter who all have COC patches on, and I've got this bandito telling me that I don't belong over here. But it was something that I got to be taught in a gentle way very early. If I guess I could say that. And that I was taught to, hey, you need to expect this coming. It's going to come.
Real quick, just to go back to what you were kind of hinting at with that Bandito member, and you were in the COC, because the Banditos were basically in charge of the COC in Texas.
Correct.
Did that confuse you? That you're like, hey, we're all supposed to be in the same room together, and you're asking me why am I in this club when you're basically hinting at that I shouldn't be in that club?
That I shouldn't be here, but it's good enough to be here to pay these COC dues that I just sat down and watched us hand over. It's good enough for me to have a 2 second
Yeah.
opinion, but the moment you walk outside, it's almost so. How do you really feel about my club?
So that was tough.
Yeah,
Tough
that
one.
was that was a real thing.
How did you manage that? Especially, I mean, you've been a member of your club now for quite a while. You're obviously still a white member. I wouldn't change anything. So how do you deal with that?
It was kind of in that moment as that point, and that's really kind of when I started transitioning heavy to the black side. So before Chosen Few here, the only other all black club here was Outcast when I was still in '99. Spent a great amount of time over there. I know several members of them, before I ever made the decision to come to Chosen Few, knowing that I could never be over there any more than I could be a bandito. But what the difference was is that I was never bashed for being white over there. It was just the acknowledgement that you can't join. Now, I won't say that there wasn't ever a person in that club who I don't with you, because you're white, but it was never a bash for being white. That was always a personal thing. It was never at the club level the way that scenario was.
Right.
I never had it come from the black member to go, damn, what the is you doing over here? It was always from the white guy going, what the are you doing over there? So it's like, where do you know how do you take that? So, but again, I was taught that very early into this life that it was gonna come. I think had I not ever had that conversation with my brother at that time as a prospect, and later on as been in his wedding and seen his kids born, if he had not ever set me down to have that conversation, there's probably no real way to tell how I would have taken that scenario at that point in time. Um,
Yeah, because it would have been a shock. It wouldn't have been,
Absolutely.
it would have been like, well, okay, I guess I'm squaring up with you, right? If you're
Right.
if
It's
you're
like,
gonna talk like that, but
what are you supposed to do? Because
yeah,
you're looking at your club like, well, really can't do that here.
yeah,
And I'm looking at, so I'm supposed to just take, what do you do?
yeah. It's difficult, but we know like you're gonna get crazy comments from people all over the place. I mean, when Mooch was a Mongol, when I was a Hell's Angel, I mean, people would come up to you with the most random, and
Right.
you have to filter it out, and you have to smile, and you can't tell somebody to go themselves because they have an opinion about something. Like, you can answer them, give them the honest answer, but like if you're moving forward and you're working on club stuff and you're about getting the business done, you don't have time for that. You don't have time to dwell in that crap.
What I really respect about all of it is you have those options to go those other ways, but you stuck with your core values, despite the fact that people on your side might say something, people on other sides might say something, but you held true to who you are as an individual, and I respect that a lot, man. And I want to give you that shout out because that's really cool.
Yeah, you didn't let the peer pressure push you in any direction. You kept your ground. That shows a lot.
Hey, you stayed you, and that's really honorable, man.
Appreciate that.
And so, like, one more time to go back and hit this, like, with the dead horse, hit the dead horse. But mentally, was it hard to deal with that? When you're by yourself with your thoughts, did you ever have to think to yourself, like, am I making the right decision? Am I doing the right thing? Like,
That comes from that lesson from my mother. I would say from an individual that probably has to be hard. Somebody who may not have grown up in the lifestyle or in the way that I did, it probably would have. Um, I was raised in and seen firsthand judgment from an aspect of gays, lesbians, race, all the way around to learn and accept everybody. So I don't care what you do as long as it doesn't bother me. That type of mentality. When it gets to me, you respect the boundaries. It didn't deter me if we're going for there. But I'm not everybody. I was raised early on, long before the motorcycle stuff. To most people are gonna hate. They're gonna go against everything that you stand for if you're not for them. That's a lesson that you got to be able to take on. Some shit, and that's also the reality is what 90% of the people who are going to come up and say that really aren't going to back up what they're saying anyways. They're really trying
For
to
sure.
just test you and your mentality. What do you
yeah,
look like, backing up? Well, damn, you're right. Let me throw the on the ground and come over. Are you gonna, if I do that, are you
yeah.
gonna get, you know,
That's not a strong man. That's a weak man.
yeah, right.
And a lot of times it's ego, right? Like, why did he
Yeah.
choose this club when he could have came to our club? We've all caught that, regardless of race. We've all caught that, and that plays a big role in it too.
Or it could have been just like just an absolute awkward way to ask somebody, like, hey, I'd like you to come to us. Why are you with them?
Yeah.
Right.
But how guys are. We just don't. Sometimes we don't know how to use the right words.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's like that guy
Absolutely.
might have just been like saying like, "Hey, bro, you look like a cool guy. Why are you hanging out with them when you could be hanging out with us?" And you're like, "Well, you don't know these guys, so it's just until you get to know people, you don't know what's going on."
Yeah.
I had some of the best time. I had some of the best times at going to the black parties, man, in L.A. I mean, it was a great time to be a biker and be invited to those parties. I mean, like, I'll tell you.
And you know what? At the end of the day, we're all here because we love riding motorcycles, spending time with each other, and partying and spending time on the road. Race really doesn't have anything to do with it.
Right. No. Again, a lot of that is that stigma from yesteryear.
Yep.
What
Yeah.
are,
Absolutely.
what are we? What the reality is? What are we all really fighting about now? Because again, not everybody's out here doing the things you can't do what you did in the 70s and 80s like you do now.
Those days
Yeah.
are over.
They're long gone.
You got a spotlight on you, man.
Everybody's got a cell phone that's got
Yep.
a camera. Every street light's got 5 cameras on it. You're not doing the things that we did back then. So to have the same type of mentality that we have in some of these areas.
To say you're holding down a state, I'm sorry, unless you're the Gypsy Jokers in Oregon, I think that everyone else is probably fooling themselves, right? Mooch, wouldn't you agree?
I started the Mongols in Oregon, so I'm going to be a little conflicted there. But
I know you did.
But no, I agree. All due respect to the Gypsy Jokers, I agree. I agree
all
with
due
you.
respect to the Gypsy Jokers and the history there. Like, they held down Oregon, and they I believe that they still have a really good,
Absolutely.
as far as a club that's established out there. Everywhere else, it's a free-for-all.
Like TakeNone knows for Texas. The Bandits held down Texas forever, but look at it now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other clubs there. And
Lots of other
that's
clubs.
everywhere.
Well, that comes to that dynamic of the West East Coast and everything, right? When you get some of the brothers who are coming from these places who have never pounded to Texas, and you start telling them about the state, and it's, well, who all you got out here? And you start going through the diamonds, and you start having to use their hands to get. Or we went from having 4 or 5 diamonds 30 years ago to having 15 plus diamonds in the state.
Yeah, and 3 of those 4 were probably affiliated with each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, times have changed when it comes to that.
The network that we're missing out on is astronomical.
We all have it in common.
We all have brothers that are dying of cancer. We all have people that have dependencies, and we need to reach out to them. Like, all these things in common. Like, it is stifling when you think about it that we cannot just figure this problem out and put it all aside.
Right.
Put it all aside.
Especially if you boil it down to, you go to prison and all the clubs stick together for the most part,
Yeah.
It's like, why? And that's a whole different, I guess, argument, because that's when race plays a role in it too. But, I mean, if you think about just club-wise, sticking together in prison, knowing that there's beef on the streets, why can't it happen on the streets? It just, there's... I don't know. I'm opening a can of worms we don't have time to get into.
Totally. We don't want to go down that road, but there's, like you said, there's so many common interests that we all have. Like, we all love to ride. We all love to go, have a good meal somewhere. We like to go to check out. We like to go to Sturgis. We like to go to Daytona. We like to go to the Dragon's Tail. We like to go to the Pigtail and ride. Like, we all like to do these same things.
Just think of the movement we could have if you came together.
Yeah, when I was in the NCOC and we were always trying to get everybody together to try to fight the government, if we would have actually gotten together, they couldn't have stopped us.
Yep.
Before we log off, TakeNone, do you have any projects or anything that you want to give shout outs to or promote, or how can we look you up on social media if you've got it? Just give us some shout outs.
I'm not too much on social media or anything.
Okay.
Just kind of local, and I'm out everywhere. I hit pretty much every region of the nation at least once or twice a year. I'm in California several times a year. If you see the club in mass, I'm probably there. But yeah, I mean, peace, love, and happiness. Just getting out and being free on this thing that we all do when it comes to this club life. Everybody can ride a motorcycle. We don't need these patches to ride. Just within this club life, just being one. It makes things easier across the board.
We appreciate your time, brother.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for coming on with us, man, and thanks for dealing with all my questions. There's stuff I always wanted to ask that I didn't, I haven't known a lot about, so I really appreciate it.
It's all good. I appreciate you having me on.
We appreciate your time, brother.
Absolutely.
This portion of the podcast is brought to you by First Bank.
Thanks, First Bank.
Thank you, TakeNone, and thanks, Mooch. Hit the subscribe button below and never miss an episode. Find us on Instagram at automoto.ent, at OG_Mooch, at Jason_Logan81, and for more info and episodes, go to automotoentertainment.com. Thank you for tuning in. See you on the next episode of Patched. Patch merchandise is available at automotoentertainment.com. The Patch podcast series is brought to you by Oak and Iron, Craft Cocktail Bar in Thousand Oaks, California, by Outdoor Creations, serving the Southern California and Nashville areas,